Okay. Can everybody pull out your smart device, please? And what we're going to do is the biggest conference selfie in Europe. Are you ready? Now everybody take a selfie with the people sitting next to you and post it up to Twitter and Instagram right now, hashtag UX Alive Turkey. So, I will speak in English. I will try to speak clearly and slowly. Some people might want to take photos of my slides. If you send me an email or tweet at me, you can download my slides with all the speaker notes. Here are the rules about my slides. Take them, use them, remix them, reuse them, present them in your organization. They are free, they are open source, okay? All you have to do is email me or tweet at me, and I will give you the download for my slides. So, I'm really excited to be here. This is a lovely hotel and the weather is just amazing. I'm going to talk a little bit about the design of companies that design user experiences. I would say that every large organization is currently making a shift from designing products to designing services, from designing software to designing experiences, from designing hardware to creating an entire ecosystem that delivers greater value to the customers. But here's the problem. We focus a great deal on the design of the user experience for our products, but we don't spend a lot of time focused on the design of the organizations that design the teams, that design the products, that deliver experiences to our customers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. So here's the first thing that I've noticed. Has anybody seen this photo before? The idea behind this is that a king brings 6 of his advisors into a large, dark room and says, "My advisors, I have discovered a great new wild animal from the east. It is called an elephant." And one advisor says, "What is an elephant?" And the king says, "Well, touch it and tell me what you feel." And so one advisor, feeling the stomach of the elephant, says, "It is a great big wall." And another advisor, feeling the trunk, says, "It feels like a tree branch." Another advisor, feeling the ear, says, "I believe it is a great big fan." And another advisor, feeling the tail, says, "I believe it is a rope." One of the things I have noticed in a lot of organizations is that user experience designers may know quite a bit about customers. They may even know quite a bit about the products themselves, but they don't necessarily understand the operating model of their organization, the business value that the organization delivers to customers, what the cash flow position of the organization looks like. They don't understand the procurement systems, the legal, the finance, the marketing, the engineering, the DevOps. In fact, many parts of a large organization have very little understanding of all the various parts that goes into actually delivering great user experiences to customers. This is something that we all experience. And so I'll talk a little bit about what we call systems thinking and how design thinking and systems thinking combined can help us create better organizations that are more resilient to create better experiences for our customers. So this gentleman's name is Clayton Christensen, and he was a management consultant. He wrote a number of articles for the Harvard Business Review. And he said a very interesting thing. He's the one who actually coined the term disruptive innovation. And he said this. He said, "The very processes that successful, well-managed companies use to serve the rapidly growing needs of their current customers can leave them highly vulnerable when market-changing technologies appear." Another way of saying this is that if you've become incredibly good at delivering value to your customers, ultimately you are doomed. You are doomed to failure. you're doomed to disruptive innovation, you're doomed to small startups coming into your marketplace and taking your customers out from underneath you. Now, an interesting thing is that our industry experiences this creative destruction every day, and this creative destruction is accelerating. This is a beautiful Leica camera. It's about 5,000 euro. It takes amazing photos, and I have one of these beautiful pieces of art. But the reality is most of us use this. When it was first introduced, it had a low quality camera that didn't even produce a 5 megabyte picture. It produced maybe a 1 megabit picture, significantly lower quality than the Leica camera that I just showed. There are now 1 billion iPhones in possession across the world, and there are fewer than 100,000 of those Leica cameras. This is an example of disruptive innovation. A low quality, low cost entrant comes into the market and eats away at the market share of a larger, significantly higher quality product. And this happens over and over and over again. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the reasons why this happens, and maybe we can uncover some ways that we can get around that. This is what's called the diffusion of innovation curve. It was invented by a gentleman named Everett Rogers. And essentially what happens is that large organizations, as they travel up this curve, from down here, first identifying who are the customers, what is their problem, what are their needs, and eventually discovering a business model that delivers value until they're able to enter the early majority and late majority. As they develop more and more processes and systems to support their organization in the delivery of value to their customers, they also develop policies, procedures, compliance-related things to ensure that they're able to generate positive cash flow and make payroll. What it also means is these exact same structures that they put in place that allow it to be profitable also prevent them from being able to see new market entrants, new disruptive technologies, for which there is only a tiny bit, if any, profit down here at the bottom with the early innovators. So one of the reasons is that companies become, over time, what we would call fragile. What that means is that they develop more and more processes and procedures, more and more rules about how people do their work, so that they can become more predictable in being able to generate quarter after quarter revenues. They become highly immune to market changes, and even while they listen to their best customers to make sure they're delivering the best value to those customers, they are often incapable of listening to the marketplace and understanding where new potentially disruptive technologies might reveal themselves. Here are some places where larger organizations start to spend more of their time. They start to worry about compliance, finance, real estate. They buy buildings. All of a sudden they have insurance to worry about. All of these things make it more and more difficult for them to become resilient and be able to change with the marketplace. What this means is that in a study of large organizations that have faltered in some way over the last 20 years, fully 70% of them have failed. And they've failed for the exact same reasons over and over again. A great example would be this. Since 2011, Yahoo has had 5 different CEOs. Yahoo was the most valuable internet company in the 1990s. Since then, it has gone through so many changes that it's been incapable of dealing with disruptive innovation. And even now, over the last 2 years, Yahoo has been broken up, sold off into pieces, and they're only a shadow of their former selves. So there's a couple of different models that large organizations try to adopt when they deal with disruptive innovation. The first one is they bring in the visionary CEO. Somebody who has a great idea, is able to sell the board of directors on this vision for the future, and they're able to come up with this brand new scheme that might rescue the company from failure. And what they do, and this is a picture from the movie Rounders with Matt Damon, the idea being that they place these massive bets. They come up with a great vision, and then they put all of the organization's resources behind that new vision. And they pray that it's going to come true, that they're going to actually make it. And the reality is, most of the time it doesn't. Another example, and this just recently has been in the news, over the last 2 years, a company called Jacero invested $120 million in designing a brand new juice machine for home consumption. $120 million building the perfect supply chain, the perfectly engineered contraption that is able to exert something like 5 tons worth of pressure on a small juice pack so that you can get juice at home. What they spent very little time doing is understanding who is our customer, what are the problems do they have, what are the jobs to be done, and what is the quickest way that we can validate our business model for delivering that value to our customers. This has been written up in the news over the last couple of weeks as either the greatest engineering feat in juicing history or the greatest business failure to ever happen. Another problem that visionary CEOs face is Wall Street. That is, they're so focused on meeting the demands of their board of directors, meeting the demands of their institutional investors, meeting the demands of earnings analysts that are expecting certain amounts of earnings per share every single quarter, that they're not able to focus on the things that really matter, including what do our customers really need, what do they value, and are we delivering that in a timely manner? Here's another model that I've noticed a lot of organizations have tried over the last 50 years. This is what's called the skunk works. Has anybody heard of a skunk works? Maybe a few of you. This started in 1943 in the United States, and here's the basic idea behind it. The British had come up with a brand new engine, an incredibly powerful jet engine, and nobody could engineer an aircraft that could actually handle the power, the thrust of the engine. And so Lockheed Martin, an American defense contractor, pulled together their smartest engineers, gave them an unlimited budget, gave them a secret location with all the toys that they needed, and said, you need to develop an aircraft that can actually take this strong jet engine and deliver it in 175 days. Here's the thing, they delivered it in 143 days, on time or earlier than on time, and significantly under budget. The thing that nobody talks about when it comes to the P-80 jet aircraft is that they delivered it after the Allies had already won the war. So it delivered no value when it came to winning the war in World War II. Now, there's another problem with the skunk works models for innovation, is that when you take your best engineers, your best designers, you give them unlimited resources, you put them over in a special location, and you ask them to innovate, they may in fact come up with a genius idea. They may come up with a fantastic innovation that totally disrupts the marketplace. More often than not, no, they fail. And there's other systemic organizational problems that come from this. It usually creates dissent within the organization because the people that weren't included feel dissatisfied. The other thing is all the learnings, all the empathy, all the great customer research that is done tends to get locked up inside of the skunk works and doesn't create systemic organizational change that matters over time. Another model, what I would like to call the Hessians, and this is named after the mercenary troops that the United States employed during the Revolutionary War back in 1776. These were German soldiers that the United States purchased, and they fought the war alongside the US revolutionaries. Hessians is basically the model where you go out as an organization and you hire a large design consulting firm, somebody like IDEO, Smart, Fjord, Frog Design, and what they end up doing is a lot of customer research, a lot of prototyping, a lot of validation, a lot of user testing. They'll develop extensive documentation, extensive specifications for the delivery of this new product or service. They might even create a new business model to support it. But what tends to happen is they write up these specifications and then they shoot them across the wall into your organization with the expectation that your teams are going to now develop, implement, and deploy these new products with no understanding of the customers, no empathy for the people that were researched, no validation or invalidation of some of the key understandings or assumptions that went into the business model. And so all of that ends up being lost. It is held by those external design agencies, and your internal teams are never able to take advantage of it. The other problem with hiring external design agencies is that oftentimes what happens is that as soon as your organization receives the specifications, You have competing interests. You may have existing product lines, or what we would call existing value streams. You have limited numbers of resources, and if anything tends to go wrong with the delivery of products and services to your current existing customers, all of your key engineers and designers are pulled off of that new innovation project and put back on the old project to make sure that that delivers on time. And so you're not able to actually take advantage of it. And usually what happens is you only are able to implement about half of what you intended to, and more often than not, it fails. And so one of the things is, if we think about some of the models that are employed by large organizations that are trying to become more resilient, trying to become more innovative, is that they adhere to the same models over and over again. The myth of the big visionary CEO, the myth of the skunk works, the myth of bringing in a great external design agency and that all of these things will change. And when they don't change, when the organization doesn't find new value or new markets to open up into, they tend to blame the employees. We didn't hire the right people. They didn't have the right skills. Our employees are lazy. They're not motivated. Fully 85% of employees in the United States that were interviewed said that they were disengaged and disempowered from their work. And yet when you think about the various models that organizations choose to deal with disruptive innovation, you might start to understand why they feel disempowered and disengaged. They weren't included in the process of designing the product or designing the way that they work to deliver the product. And so this really comes back to two basic theories of human behavior that was first written about by a guy named Douglas McGregor. He was an MIT researcher back in the 1960s. And he developed two theories, Theory X and Theory Y, about the motivation of employees within large organizations. And usually, if you listen to any management meeting, if you sit in any management meeting and you listen to managers or senior directors or senior executives, you'll be able to start to understand some of the assumptions that are underlying their beliefs and what they say. Some of the things may be that people are a cost to be monitored and controlled. That is, we need to make sure that people are 100% utilized. The work should be highly segmented by their expertise, and this gave rise to what we call the matrix organization, where, for instance, a user experience designer reports to the manager of user experience, who reports to the director of user experience, who usually reports to the VP of product, who then reports to maybe the CTO or the CIO or the chief marketing officer. So what you see is that within organizations, the talent, the people are not aligned around the delivery of a product or service, but instead they are aligned around a functional expertise. And the third part of Theory X is really that technology should be used to control human behavior. This actually comes from an interesting assumption that goes all the way back to Sigmund Freud, the psychoanalyst. And he believed that the reason why we have social norms and rules in society is because at our base, underlying the surface, we are highly carnal creatures that are spurned towards passions that must be controlled, because otherwise we would go crazy. And this is actually at play in a lot of large organizations that do things like time tracking and making sure that everybody is working on the right thing at the right time and making sure that everybody is highly utilized. Now, a totally different theory that McGregor came up with was Theory Y. That people can enjoy their work, they can feel passionate about their work. The more people understand about the system they work in, the more they're engaged they are to actually deliver value. That people can be self-motivated and can actually bring passion to work and want to actually deliver great value, want to solve their customers' problems, and they want to get along with the people around them. In fact, they want to enjoy what we spend a large percentage of our time doing. And so the interesting thing is that if you assume Theory X is right, that people are lazy, that people need to be controlled, what's interesting is that Chris Argyris came up with a thing called the inference ladder. And he said, basically, if you believe the Theory X is right, you will, as a manager or as a senior executive, create a system that reinforces those bad behaviors. By creating time tracking systems, you will create a system where people are always accounting for their time instead of focusing on solving customer problems. And the interesting thing about it is that what we do is we observe what we see around us, We perceive the data that we observe, we make assumptions and inferences, and then we change or modify the system based on our assumptions, which then reinforce the bad behavior that we were trying to change. And this happens over and over and over again within large organizations, again, making them more fragile so that they're less capable of innovation. Now, this is particularly bad in what we call knowledge work. As opposed to 100 years ago, where most of the people in this room, myself included, would probably be working in a factory, making widgets or assembling cars or assembling some kind of mechanical device. Now, we spend most of our time moving knowledge around, taking knowledge in, processing knowledge, synthesizing knowledge, and then generating new knowledge. Now, knowledge work, this is a term that was coined by a management consultant named Peter Drucker, is fundamentally different from mechanistic, deterministic work like factories or automobile assembly lines. It means that small changes can create large epistemic changes to the organization. You cannot plan perfectly what the outcomes will be. In fact, as you develop a product and show it to your customer, your business model may change, your assumptions may change, the needs of the marketplace may change, because we conduct knowledge work inside of what we call complex adaptive systems. What that means is that you can't perfectly predict all the time how something will turn out. And in fact, the more effort and time we spend on planning things, the more likely we're going to deliver the wrong thing too late and significantly over budget. And this falls into a notion called systems thinking. And really all it says is a system is a network that has coherence. That is, you can perceive the thing as a network. An example of a system would be this room right now, where every individual within this room is an agent. Each one of you has the freedom to act within it. Any one of you right now could stand up and walk outside the room. Any one of you could stand up and challenge me on any of the things that I'm saying. And then all of a sudden, this entire talk would take a totally different turn. And so we actually are co-evolving over the next 2 days this system that we call a conference. And we have a great deal of freedom to do that. But there's some problems that arise. One of which, this was first coined by a gentleman named Karl von Clausewitz. He was a military theorist in the Prussian military back in the 1800s. And what he said is, with complex systems, there is always friction. What that means is everything that seems to go wrong will go wrong. Things that you think are going to be easy tend to be much harder than you expected, and things that you knew were going to be hard could end up being absolutely impossible. Does anybody here work within an agile company or an agile development team? A few of you? Has anybody here done planning poker or estimates? What probability do you have if somebody estimates a unit of work at an 8 that it is actually an 8? Less than 5% of the time? Human beings are notoriously bad at estimating the level of effort required, especially within complex adaptive systems. Von Clausewitz said, and this is an interesting thing, if anybody has ever watched the boxer Mike Tyson, he said, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. Another way of saying this, and this is what von Clausewitz said, no plan of military operations extends beyond any certainty within first contact with an opposing force. What that means is you can have the best military strategy in the world, and as soon as the battle is engaged, everything changes. Another thing that we've noticed within large organizations' complex adaptive systems that prevent them from delivering on time is overutilization. And that is, people aren't working 80% of their 40-hour work time or 90%. Most people within most organizations tend to be working at 100% utilization. What this means is if something bad happens, if one of your servers goes down, if there's a problem with a customer, what happens? Do you change all of your plans? Or do you just make up that time on the weekends and in the evenings? When systems are overutilized, it means that they have no slack to recover from bad things that might happen. So an example would be back in 1997, I was working on a server system. Every Monday at approximately 8 a.m., all of our servers would go down. And they did it every single week. And about the 4th week in a row, we realized, hey, wait a second, maybe there's a problem here. The thing was, we had all these plans about how we were supposed to operationalize all of our features. We released every Friday, and our servers went down every Monday. What we realized was that we weren't building slack into the system. We weren't building time into the system in case things went wrong, and we didn't build time into the system to allow us to learn more about how to improve our system. The interesting thing is that this is a highway system at 100% utilization. If anybody's ever been in a traffic jam, you realize that you can't get anywhere, and you certainly can't get there when you plan to. And if something horrible were to happen, and you needed fire and police and emergency crews to get from point A to point B, they couldn't do it in a 100% utilized system. And yet most senior executives assume that 100% utilization of resources, that is us, the people doing the work, is a good thing. So here are some of my, what I would call solution hypotheses. What I mean by that is these are not solutions. These are hypotheses that I think you might take, you might bring into your organization and try to run some experiments to see if some of these things might work. Because the reality is the systems that you work within are probably significantly different culturally, epistemically, system-wide than any organization I've worked in. And that might be because of culture, it might be because of the market that you're in, it might be because of the people that you have. The first is creating or fostering a learning organization, using what I would call strategic intent to foster distributed decision-making, use ideas from lean thinking to manage the flow and remove waste, leverage design thinking to build empathy, rapidly prototype, test, and iterate. And finally, change the processes, policies, rewards, and mindsets so that the culture slowly changes over time. So what does that really mean? A learning organization is something that was first coined by a gentleman named Peter Senge in a book called The Fifth Discipline. And what it really means is creating a culture where learning is actually valued. Now, within highly fragile, large organizations, you might hear things like, failure is not an option. Now, the problem with that statement is that the only way that we actually learn is through failure. But I'm not talking about big bet failure. What I'm talking about is small, manageable, bounded failure, which means that you need to do multiple concurrent experiments that are allowed to fail because they won't sink your company. The next thing is personal mastery. That is a focus on making sure that you are spending a certain amount of time developing your skills. That means that if you're a UX designer, becoming better at writing open-ended, non-biased questions, conducting user experience walkthroughs or cognitive walkthroughs, doing user testing. Maybe you want to gain a new skill that has to do with prototyping or creating clickable prototypes. But the thing is you need to be able to learn outside of just your domain, just outside of your expertise, what we would call adjacent learning. So understanding better what are the skills you need to understand from a marketing perspective, from a finance perspective, from an infrastructure perspective, not just learning how to code, but understanding the larger organization and system that you work in and starting to gain mastery over external skills so that you can better improve the overall system of work. And then focus on what we call strategic intent. Now, a lot of organizations and senior executives will define perhaps the strategic vision, and which is the what we're going to do and why we need to do it. But then oftentimes they also define how it's going to be done and when it's going to be done. Strategic intent was another term that came from Karl von Clausewitz over 200 years ago, and the idea being this: the senior military commanders or senior executives are so far removed from your customers that they can't make good decisions about what customers actually need. And so senior executives should define the what and the why of the organization, and then allow the people at the bottom, the people that are actually doing the work, the people that are closer to the work and closer to the customer, to determine how they're going to do the work, what they're going to focus on, what their experiments are going to be, and how they're going to validate or invalidate whether or not their assumptions were right before you figure out what is the business model and how are we going to scale it. And the final thing is distributed cognition. What this means is allowing people that are furthest from the center of power, that is people that are not in the executive C-suite, to be able to make the best decisions that are right for the customer. There's a great example of the CEO of the Four Seasons Hotel who only had one intent for the entire organization, and it's one of the reasons why the hotel has some of the best customer experience of any hotel and has been consistently ranked #1 over the last 10 years in a row. He told all the employees that they are completely empowered to make the right decisions and treat the customers the way they want to be treated. That's it. There is no employee handbook. There are no rules other than do what's right for the customer and treat the customer the way you want to be treated. And they are now the best performing hotel in the entire world. And then this, design thinking. And this is a good friend of mine, John Coco, who is a designer at Carnegie Mellon when I knew him, and then he's gone on to be a senior designer at Frog Design, and then he established a small firm called the Austin Center for Design that applies design thinking to social problems like homelessness. So he says this: utilizing design thinking, empathy with users, a discipline of prototyping, tolerance for failure, is the best tool we have for creating those kinds of interactions and developing a responsive, flexible organizational culture. So the things that we apply towards developing better products for our customers, we should actually apply towards our own organizations so we can become better, more humane systems in delivering a value. The next thing is really what I call deep hanging out, which is another way of saying ethnography, which means spend more time outside of your building with your customers in their context than you spend inside of your building. If you spend 80% of your time with your customers, you will get a much better understanding of the real problems that they have, which will give you greater insights into the real problems that you should be solving that will generate value for your company. The more time you spend at your desk wireframing designs, the less time you're actually uncovering interesting insights that might lead to greater disruptive innovation. And the other thing that's important to keep in mind is that a lot of people like to engage in various forms of brainstorming that is generating collaboratively amongst a group of people various ideas, various concepts. What we're very bad at in a lot of organizations is what I call ritual dissent. That is finding a structured way to critique our designs and to check what are our underlying assumptions that exist within our organization that are preventing us from delivering real value. And this then leads to the final thing, which is creating a culture of experimentation so that we actually are constantly able to iterate and deliver more value. I'm going to skip this one and focus on the last thing. This is what's called the STAR model by Jay Galbraith. He's an organizational designer. And what he says is this: when we start with the purpose, that is our strategy, and we define a new strategy, we then have to redesign the structure of the organization, that is how are decisions made, the processes for delivering that value, the rewards or motivation for how we get teams aligned and doing the right thing, and finally, what are the mindsets and learnings that people have to have in order to actually execute on that strategy. And the final thing is really this: we need to make sure that everything is coherent. That is, when we come up with a new strategy, it actually matches the needs of the marketplace so that you're not working on a strategy that is complete bullshit. What that means is that it's one thing to get the entire organization aligned behind a great vision, but if that vision doesn't match the needs of the marketplace, ultimately you're doomed. The final thing is this. I've included an entire reading list of everything that went into this talk, so anybody who asks for my slides, this will be included, as well as all the additional reading material, so that you can start your journey of learning as well. Thank you very much.